One of the difficulties we have when talking about the origin of the Scriptures is that the Bible doesn't have a real flashy origin story. It's not like Islam, where you have the story of the origin of the Quran, how the angel Gabriel whispered into the ear of Muhammad. In Mormonism, you have Joseph Smith translating the mysterious golden tablets that he dug up. The Bible doesn't have anything flashy like that. The Bible's origin story is actually very, very ordinary. Which actually I think is kind of a neat feature about it, because one of the things we see God doing throughout the story of the Old Testament and the New Testament is taking the ordinary and doing extraordinary things with it. The origins of the Bible is very ordinary. Something happened, usually in the first stage of composition, an event, the crossing of the Red Sea or the call of the first disciples, crucifixion. Something happened, and when something happens, people start talking about it. The oral transmission stage of any text is often thought to be, particularly by us Western scientific minds, as a very fluid time of the text. We tend to run down the oral transmission period. One of the reasons we do that, I think, is because we're not a culture that really knows how to listen very well. We're very good at the visual. We're very good at striking visuals. But other cultures throughout history and even in the world today are much better auditors, much better listeners than we are. I had a colleague who teaches at Samford University. He was wanting to talk about the exile of Judah, because he was getting to that part in the history of in the semester. So he was going to read from Psalm 137, which is a psalm about the exile. But he forgot his Bible when he took it to class. And of course, he gets to class and 70 students in the class, nobody has a Bible at this great Baptist school there in Alabama. But suddenly one student from an African culture said, "Well, what were you wanting?" And he said, "Well, Psalm 137. And he said, "Which verses?" He said, "Well, all of them." And the student went on to recite in perfect King James English all the verses of Psalm 137. Of course, that brings class to a screeching halt. And he said, "How much of the Bible do you have memorized?" And the student said, "Well, about 2/3, but my father said I'm a really poor memorizer." He came from a culture that prioritized memorization, that was an emphasis. And so there are cultures and ways in which oral transmission can be as reliable as the written text. I just don't want to run that down and allow our cultural prejudices to just sort of dismiss that part of the transmission process. But sooner or later, something motivates writing these things down. In the case of the New Testament, it was the death of that first generation that had walked with Jesus that really began to motivate writing these texts down about the story of the resurrection, crucifixion, the life of Jesus. Soon those fragments are collected together, and you start to get them edited into what we would think of as books. And so you have the books of Genesis and the book of Leviticus and the book of Deuteronomy and all of those. And then you start to collect those books together. And so you keep the Torah books together, and you keep the prophets together. And soon you have the writings, and you have the Psalms, and you have Daniel, and you have Chronicles, and you have Bel and the Dragon, and First Maccabees, and the Prayer of Ezra, and Enoch. And wait a minute, Dr. Wallace, I don't have those in my Bible, I hear you say. Well, not if you were raised in the denomination or one like the one I was raised. You don't. That's because the seventh stage of the composition process is the most important, and that is canonization. Canonization is what determines what texts are read by what groups. A canon with one N, that canon with two N's is a very big gun. That's not what we're talking about here. A canon with one N is a list of books that has been recognized by a group to be authoritative for faith and practice. And that canonization process, that decision about what is canonical, is an important one for any faith community. Different religious groups have different canons. For example, in the Old Testament, the Jewish biblical canon, what we would think of as the Old Testament, is 39 books, Genesis to Malachi in the Christian ordering. It's actually Genesis to 2 Chronicles in the Jewish ordering, don't worry about that. The Protestant canon is 39 Old Testament books, as recognized by the Jewish canon, and 27 New Testament books, the 66-book canon that so many of you are familiar with, certainly the one I grew up with. If, however, you're Catholic, that canon is a little bit different. You have 39 Old Testament books and 27 New Testament books, and then you have 7 other books, sometimes called the Deuterocanonicals. Those books, which we'll talk more about in a later video, fill the gap in between the Old and the New Testament. They sort of help bring the close of the Old Testament, the opening of the New Testament to fruition. They were canonized much later, so their canon is very different. Another group would be the Coptic Orthodox Canon. The Coptic Orthodox Canon is a little more complicated. You have 46 Old Testament books, 27 New Testament books, and then you have 8 other texts that are authoritative, sort of about 8. It's like counting fish in an aquarium. It's really hard to nail down. They're not a a priority. Canon is not a priority in the Coptic Orthodox Church, so it's hard to nail those down. So basically, you have to answer the question, what is important for us to read? What books are useful for faith and practice? What books are inspired? And it's that canonical process that makes that determination.